Freedom has never been a gift wrapped and handed down by the oppressor. Martin Luther King Jr. warned us 60 years ago, it must be demanded, seized, and defended by the oppressed. And today, on African soil, those words ignite with a new fire. Picture this: a continent of 1.4 billion people, long forced to rent space on Silicon Valley's digital toll roads, suddenly flips the switch. No more detours across the Atlantic just to send an email next door. No more billions drained into the pockets of distant shareholders. No more voices drowned beneath algorithms built thousands of miles away. Overnight, Africa declares a digital independence as bold as any revolution of the past. But here's the paradox. In America, self-reliance is celebrated as virtue. Stand on your own 2 feet, we are told. Build your own future. Yet when Africans like Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré, demand sovereignty, whether in gold, in food, or in data, they are met not with applause but with suspicion, even hostility. Why? Because this is not just about Wi-Fi speeds or shiny new tech. It is about power. It is about dignity. It is about who gets to decide the future. And for the farmer in Ouagadougou or the student in Nairobi, this is no abstract debate. It is a question of survival. The cost of internet in Africa ranks among the highest in the world. Families sacrifice food on the table just to keep children connected for school. Meanwhile, the American corporations rake in billions every single year. So here we stand at a turning point, a battle between safety and dependence or risk and freedom. For decades, Africa's digital lifeline was a one-way street. Every search, every transaction, every message from Ghana to Burkina Faso was forced to detour thousands of miles through servers in Europe or the United States before circling back. Imagine mailing a letter to your neighbor in the next house, but first shipping it across the Atlantic Ocean. That was daily reality for hundreds of millions. And this design wasn't just inefficient, it was punishing. Families in Burkina Faso or Kenya spent a disproportionate share of their income on internet bills, sometimes as much as a week's worth of groceries, just to keep children connected for class. Why? Because Africa was not an architect of the system. It was a tenant renting space on someone else's property. The bill came due every month and the landlord lived overseas. Meanwhile, Silicon Valley giants raked in billions. Google, Amazon, Microsoft. They weren't just service providers. They were gatekeepers. They decided what Africans could find, how fast they could receive it, and which voices were amplified or silenced. An African student searching the proud history of the Mali Empire often found more about Napoleon than about their own ancestors. That is not an accident. That is architecture, an architecture of dependency. And now the confrontation becomes unavoidable. In the old order, there were only 2 choices: submit quietly to the digital empire or risk everything to build something new. It is the same choice that defined every freedom struggle before. Dependence may feel safe, but it guarantees subordination. Freedom is dangerous, uncertain, expensive, but it is the only road to dignity. This is the crossroads where Africa now stands. And this is the moment when Ibrahim Traoré, barely in his mid-30s, raises his voice with a message the world cannot ignore. When the cameras turned to him, Ibrahim Traoré did not speak like a cautious politician. He spoke like a soldier of sovereignty, a man who had stared at the chains of dependency and chosen to break them. His words were not wrapped in polite diplomacy. They were sharp, uncompromising, and unforgettable. Dependence ends, he declared, the day we decide it ends. Not tomorrow, not when Washington approves, not when Paris allows, the day we decide. That line spread like wildfire across African social media. It was printed on banners in Ouagadougou, painted on murals in Dakar, turned into hashtags by students in Nairobi. Our data, our destiny. For the first time, sovereignty was not just a slogan. It was a living project coded into fiber optics and concrete. Traoré framed the choice with brutal clarity. The first path, safety and dependence. Continue paying inflated fees to foreign shareholders. Continue accepting slow connections, filtered knowledge, in a future designed elsewhere. This path is predictable, it is familiar, but it guarantees subordination forever. The second path, Risk and freedom. Build Africa's own digital highways. Lay more than 60,000 miles of fiber across deserts and jungles. Construct 47 data centers across the continent. Adopt a protocol deliberately incompatible with Silicon Valley's monopoly. This path is costly, it is uncertain. It will provoke resistance from the most powerful corporations on Earth, but it also means reclaiming not only wealth, but dignity. And Traoré did not flinch. At only 30-something years old, he embodies a generation unwilling to inherit chains disguised as contracts. He tells his people, if we can reclaim our gold, if we can reclaim our farms, then we can reclaim our minds and even our internet. This is not just leadership. It is defiance turned into architecture. When the switch was finally flipped, the shock was not in Africa, it was in Silicon Valley. Within 72 hours, over 200 million Africans migrated to the new system. No platform in history, not Facebook, not WhatsApp, not TikTok, had ever seen adoption on this scale so quickly. Executives at Google and Microsoft rushed into emergency meetings. The nightmare was not just competition, it was incompatibility. By design, the African protocol could not be indexed by Google's crawlers, could not be penetrated by Microsoft's cloud. The monopoly had been broken at the root, and while Africa celebrated, the West panicked. In Washington, lawmakers framed the move as digital fragmentation, warning that Africa was undermining global security. Behind closed doors, they debated sanctions. In Paris and London, the language was the same. A sovereign African internet was not innovation, it was rebellion. For decades, these capitals had shaped Africa's narratives. Now, for the first time, they could not control the flow. But outside the corridors of power, something very different happened. In South America, leaders studied the model, hinting at their own continental networks. In Asia, governments already experimenting with regional systems now had proof. Digital independence on a continental scale was possible. What began as Africa's rebellion was fast becoming a global blueprint. Inside Africa, the response was electric. In Nairobi, students streamed lectures without interruption for the first time in their lives. In Lagos, small businesses reported lower transaction costs within days. In Ouagadougou, journalists searched in their native languages and found African voices first, not buried beneath foreign summaries. Hashtags trended across the continent. Africa connected, sovereignty now, Traoré vision. Murals appeared in Accra and Dakar with bold letters, our data, our destiny. Youth groups turned Traoré's words into chants, songs, and viral clips. Civil society movements demanded safeguards, warning governments not to misuse sovereignty as an excuse for censorship. And suddenly, sovereignty itself became tangible. Not theory, not rhetoric, but infrastructure. Fiber, cables, servers, code. Yet with triumph came tension. Could Africa withstand the pressure? Could it resist both external sabotage and internal temptation? The West had weapons far beyond words: financial leverage, diplomatic pressure, and the ability to isolate economies. And inside Africa, the question grew sharper. Would new leaders defend liberty, or would they abuse control? The confrontation had outgrown one man or one country. It was no longer just Traoré's fight. It was a continental standoff, with the eyes of the world fixed on Africa's boldest gamble yet. The turning point did not arrive with a speech. It arrived with cables buried under deserts, towers rising in capitals, and servers humming in silence. For the first time in history, Africa's digital arteries pulsed with their own blood. Over 60,000 miles of fiber stretched across the continent. 47 new data centers lit up from Dakar to Nairobi. The promise of sovereignty was no longer an idea. It was infrastructure. In Nairobi, students logged on to stream lectures without interruption. For years, buffering screens had been their constant companion. Now, entire classrooms watched live sessions in real time. For the first time, one student tweeted, "The internet feels like it's ours." The post went viral, not because of its technical detail, but because of the pride beneath the words. In Lagos, entrepreneurs celebrated savings as digital transactions bypassed foreign detours. Every payment that once zigzagged through Europe now traveled directly across African cables. Costs dropped, Profits rose, and with them, confidence. Startups that once dreamed of scaling globally finally had the foundation to grow at home. In Ouagadougou, journalists searched African history in their native languages and saw their ancestors' stories appear first. Oral traditions digitized, African scholars elevated, indigenous voices no longer drowned. The shift was not just about speed, it was about narrative. Who gets remembered and who gets erased? And in rural Burkina Faso, families no longer had to choose between food and connection. Internet bills shrank to a fraction of what they once were. Parents spoke of dignity, children of possibility. Each small change stitched together a larger truth. Freedom made visible in daily life. Meanwhile, social media blazed with slogans. Our data, our destiny, Africa connected, Traoré vision, youth turned hashtags into chants, murals, and rallies. Civil society pushed for transparency, insisting that sovereignty must never become a weapon for censorship. But the symbolism was undeniable. For centuries, Africa's wealth, gold, oil, cocoa, cotton, flowed outward. Even data, the invisible resource of the modern age, had been siphoned away. Now the current reversed. Knowledge, money, and opportunity circled inward, feeding the roots of a new independence. The revolution was no longer whispered, it was lived. In classrooms, in markets, in homes. On every screen that lit up with African control, dignity was restored. And the world, stunned by the scale and speed, finally had to admit the monopoly was broken. The climax of this revolution was not just cables underground or servers rising like cathedrals. It was an image, ordinary, almost mundane, yet charged with historic weight. A student in Nairobi streaming a lecture without interruption, a farmer in Burkina Faso selling crops through a local app, payments moving instantly without detours across oceans. A young coder in Lagos launching her app and seeing it reach millions of neighbors within days, not blocked or buried by distant algorithms. Each scene looked simple, but each was revolutionary. For centuries, Africa's treasures flowed outward. Gold, cocoa, oil, cotton. Always extracted, always shipped, always enriching someone else. Even the invisible wealth of the digital era, data itself, had been siphoned away. Every search, every transaction, every bite of knowledge left the continent before coming back. Sovereignty was a speech. Freedom was an illusion, until now. With the continental internet exchange, that flow reversed. Data no longer bled out. It circulated inward. Value stayed home. Engineers were hired. Startups were funded. Farmers gained access to fairer markets. Students found their own history rising to the top of search results. For the first time, Africans were not passengers on a system designed elsewhere. They were drivers, building roads of their own. And in that shift lay a deeper symbolism. The murals in Ouagadougou captured it best. Our hands, our life, our future. 3 simple phrases, painted on walls, chanted at rallies, printed on t-shirts. More than a slogan, it was a philosophy. That sovereignty is not given, not borrowed, not rented. It is built line by line, brick by brick, cable by cable. The moral was clear. Freedom in the digital age is not only about borders or armies, it is about who owns the invisible infrastructure of daily life. The cables under the oceans, the servers in faraway cities, the algorithms that decide what we see and what we forget. For generations, Africa was told it was too dependent, too poor, too fragmented to create its own path. And yet here it stood, connected by its own design, speaking in its own voice, writing its own story. The echoes reached far beyond Africa. In Latin America, leaders pointed to the African model as a path toward independence. In Asia, governments studying regional frameworks now had proof of possibility. Even in the West, older generations recognized the parallel. The same heartbeat that once marched through civil rights protests and Berlin walls now pulsed through African fiber optics. The tools were different, no tanks, no barricades, but the battle was the same, dignity versus domination. And so the question turns outward to every viewer, every nation, every citizen. When faced with the choice between safety, independence, or risk and freedom, what would you choose? The answer defines not only Africa's future, but the future of all humanity in a world where power is shifting, not with bombs, but with bandwidth. History is being rewritten in real time, and this time, Africa holds the pen. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters across Africa and beyond, this is not just a story about technology. It is a mirror, reflecting the most dangerous and the most beautiful question of our time. Who decides your future? For generations, Africa's destiny was written elsewhere. Its gold counted in foreign vaults, its crops priced in foreign markets, its data stored in foreign servers. But today, a line has been drawn. Ibrahim Traoré and millions of young Africans are declaring to the world, dependence ends the day we decide it ends. And here is where you come in. This debate is not Africa's alone. It belongs to every nation, every household, every parent who has ever wondered, what are we handing down to our children? Chains disguised as contracts, or the courage to build something of our own? So I ask you, what would you choose? Safety and dependence, or risk and freedom? If you believe that this moment deserves to be remembered, if you believe sovereignty is not a slogan but the foundation of dignity, then don't just watch, participate. Tap the like button. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what freedom means to you and whether you believe your own country is truly independent in the digital age. Because history is not written by the silent. It is written by those who speak, those who bear witness, those who act. And finally, if you want to keep walking with us through stories of courage, defiance, and sovereignty, then subscribe now. Join this movement of minds and voices, because the next chapter is already being written, and you deserve to be the first to see it unfold. Remember this, from Ouagadougou to Nairobi, from Lagos to Johannesburg, a continent has stood up and said, our hands, our life, our future. That cry will echo far beyond Africa. The only question left is, will you echo it too?